What's up everyone, it's Gaijin Gamer here, back with another Summoner's War Lost Centuria video, and today we'll be covering spells. So without further ado, let's hop right in. Alrighty guys, and before we start, I just wanted to mention that I don't think there's as much of a clear divide for spells as there was for maybe a tier list as far as, the champions go. I think it's more just like situational as to what spells may be better in battles. Like even in the upper echelons of PvP, I'm seeing such a wide variety of spells. So there's not as much of a clear divide as to what may be better than others. I'll point out a few that I really like versus others, and the reasons why. But without further ado, let's just hop right into it. First up, we have Chain Lightning. Now, Chain Lightning I think is great for climbing the ladder, to be 100% honest, because it kind of requires your opponent to like have multiple of the same attribute. Especially earlier game, you tend to have just whatever you got. And not only does it stun the targets, so for example, if you have if you target the first character who's a fire character, and they have 4 or 5 other fire characters, not only is it going to chain to every single one of those characters, but it's going to do increased damage as it keeps chaining, as well as give attack down 3 status, which is pretty amazing. However, towards later game, you'll start to find that people start to balance out their teams just a little bit better, so it becomes a little less relevant, I feel, towards end game PvP. Next up, we have Synergy, and this grants attack up 2 on all allies and recover unrecoverable on all enemies, as well as it's conditional. And if you have less allies than enemies, you get continuous recoveries on allies and attack down on the enemies, which, it's kind of like a an oh crap card basically. You're kind of like behind, you kind of want to gain the advantage. However, the one thing that I personally don't like this card because it grants your team a buff, and with Soha becoming more prevalent in the meta, I think that anything that gives me a buff, I'm just not too excited about, as I already run kind of Wusa on my party combo. Next up, we have Transfer. Now, Transfer is awesome. I think this might be one of the better cards in the later game. I kind of see it everywhere. And what it does is like you tend to run into a lot of Berettas, as well as, like Pernas, and even I'm not sure that it works on Maul or Nikki. In fact, I don't think it does. But this transfers all debuffs on your team to the enemy team, as well as does damage initially, and I think it's great. So that's very helpful. Next up, we have Blood Curtain, and what this does is consumes 20% of your HP, as well as gives your team a shield for the health that's lost. As you can see, the shield percentage levels up with the card. I do think this is an amazing ability, but then again, I do run it sometimes. However, if you run up against a Soha, it's just kind of a less great card. In fact, it's a dead card until she's dead, because you don't want to give your opponent a shield for free for losing 20% off of each of your characters. So just something to keep in mind. Next up, we have Chill Tornado. What this does is it casts Deceleration on your enemies, on all of the enemies, and if they already have Deceleration, it then freezes them. Now, this is an amazing card to run with, Poseidon or your Ganymedes, as they cast like team-wide deceleration, or at least front and back row. So it's something to keep in mind, that I probably wouldn't run this card if I didn't have one of those two, but it is a great card if you do, and I do see this in a lot of cleaves type combos, and it is pretty dangerous, especially if you're able to kind of line it up correctly. Next up, we have the Chain of Despair, and as everyone should know, because you get it right away, this is going to stun the first enemy in the order, as well as it kind of jumps from one to another, assuming you're able to kill them within the time that the chain persists. And I do think it's great early game as well, and it does do quite a bit of damage. However, just later game, you're just able to deal with it a little bit better, I feel, and people are kind of more prepared for that sort of thing. But there still exist scenarios where this just comes in perfectly, where you kind of wear your opponent down, and they, especially if you're running like a dot cleave, you kind of just chip away at your opponent, you get them less than half health, like almost all of your opponents, and then you send out the Chain of Despair, and you're just kind of farming their team at that point. So something to keep in mind. It may be useful in that case scenario. Next up, we have Reckless Devotion, and it grants attack up 3, immunity, and mana cost down 1 on all frontline allies, and then it blocks them from receiving beneficial effects and grants defense down when the duration ends. I'm not a big fan of this. Not only is it a negative, but also Soha can steal it, so it's good when it's up, but it then kind of creates like a downfall, so this might be one of my least favorite cards, to be honest. Giant Warrior grants Giant Warrior on the ally with the highest attack power. Now this one's interesting. I think later on in the game it's going to become better. As of right now, we just like for example like Lucian. You know, he doesn't have as much defense to ignore, and I feel like our characters don't have as much attack percentage, or you know, just quite at the moment. But I do feel like this could become good. Another reason I really like this ability as well is like Soha typically won't be able to steal this ability because it'll be further back in your lines. So that's something to keep in mind. I do foresee that becoming more prevalent as the meta kind of shifts. Next up, probably my favorite ability, Spoil, and I do see this kind of quite frequently in the in-game as well. So something to keep in mind is if you're able to pull this card, it's definitely good, and I would definitely run it. And now what this does, and I don't even run a dot cleave. The reason I like it so much is because just like damage over time, especially with the initial damage it does, just gives so much raw damage that it's actually insane. And it kind of forces your opponent to respond to it as well for 2 mana. So at the very least, they could be wasting a spell that, you know, causes immunity or something at the cost of 2 of your mana, and it's insanely powerful, and I really like it, and it's extremely powerful in the meta right now currently as well. So I do think this is probably one of the better cards. Next up, we have Weakness Found. And what this does, it captures the weakness of all enemies, and it blocks them from receiving beneficial effects, grants attack down 3, glancing hit up 3, and if the target's attack is higher than defense, grants defense down and branding 3, if defense is higher than attack. So either grants the defense down if their attack is higher than defense, or if the defense is higher, then it grants branding. It's sort of a kind of, you know, sort that out for you. One thing I do want to test, I haven't really tested this ability, although I may start running this a little bit more in some normal battles just to test to see how it works. If this stops Soha from receiving, like if I do a Wusa shield right after I use this ability, this might become one of my more favorited cards, just to stop Soha from essentially doing it. I think Soha is becoming kind of dangerous in the meta right now, and personally, I'm kind of playing my team anti-Soha, so something you may want to look into, and I am going to kind of check and comment below as to if this does work and stops her from receiving buffs if she was to steal one. So we'll kind of continue on here. Next up, we have Soul Cleanse, and I think this also is one of the better current cards in the meta. It recovers the HP of all allies and removes all of their harmful effects, and gain 1 mana for each harmful effect removed. This spell can gain up to 3 mana. So not only does it cost 2, but you gain 3. So you're up 1 mana if you're able to cleanse 3 debuffs, but it also heals and cleanses all debuffs, which is amazing. Especially since the dot cleaves, or you know, just teams running a Beretta or you know a Perna or just something is definitely pretty prevalent. So you may want to look into running that card if you're lucky enough to pull it. The good old Soul Cleanse. Next up, we have one of the higher tier cards, which in my opinion I do think this is extremely good. As you can see, it grants invincibility for 4 seconds and immunity for 7 seconds. I tend to like to run cheaper spell cards, just due to the fact that I kind of run like an anti-meta team that kind of has a higher mana cost. But I do think that this could be good, especially in any given scenario. It's just going to give invincibility for 4 seconds, immunity for 7 seconds, very strong effects. Then again, I am still worried about, you know, Soha potentially stealing this and giving it to their team as well. So something to think about. Next up, we have Flame Strike, and you know, initially I kind of got rid of all of my, you know, stunning and damaging cards to your opponent's team. However, the more I kind of play and the longer I stay in the, you know, the higher echelons of PvP, I think that this might start to become better as time moves on. Granted, it is 3 mana, but unlike the lightning or chain lightning above, as we first discussed, this is kind of unconditionally attacks the back row of your enemies, and it's going to hit 4 targets, or you know, depending on how many are alive in the back row, up to 4 targets each and every time. Versus chain lightning is kind of RNG, or if your opponent, you know, kind of requires your opponent to bring an unbalanced team. So I do feel like this is starting to gain some relevance, as well as it's a super strong counter card. So it's something to think about, and I do think it's one of the better cards out there if you're able to get it. Next up, we have Damage Conversion. And this one's kind of gimmicky. I've never really been a fan of gimmicky cards. However, in the right scenario at the right time, it could be very good. And essentially what this does is damage conversion. You put it on your front line, and every time they take damage, instead of taking the amount of damage they would be healing it instead. So for example, if you have a huge like Tessarion uses his ultimate and it's about to do some huge AoE damage, instead of and then you cast your damage conversion thereafter, it's going to heal your front row, but your back row is still going to take the damage. So something to keep in mind. I especially for 3 mana, it's a little pricey for me. It's yet to be determined to see if this is going to be better in the future, but as of right now, it's not my favorite. Next up, we got Reflection Shield, and this creates the Reflection Shield on the forefront ally to save the incoming damage. And not only that, what it does is creates a big shield, and it reflects the damage that would be caused to your ally. I think this is good. However, it's very kind of situational. It's one of my lesser favorite cards. It could be stolen first and foremost, and not only that, it kind of requires your opponent to play against it. Like they would then have to like use an attack that just did a bunch of damage to that forefront ally, and then kind of kill themselves. Essentially, is kind of the ploy of this. Granted, it is a big shield, but I just kind of tend to auto attack it down until it's done, or I tend to use like attacks that would not target the forefront ally while it's up. Essentially. Next up, we have Vitality Conversion. And this, along with some of the other ones I mentioned before, I think this is starting to become pretty powerful in the end game meta. This exchanges the HP ratio ally with the lowest on your team with the highest on the enemy team, as well as grants a shield on the ally afterwards. So essentially what you want to do, you got your forefront tank, if you're able to get it lucky enough. Granted, this is a 4-cost mana, and it is a hero level card here. So if you're lucky enough to get this, but I think this is great because what you essentially want to do, like I mentioned before, your front tank is about to die and they have a fully healed, DPS in the background. Well, you use this puppy to counter one of their cards that's about to kill your tank. So now you have full health. Your opponent's, biggest threat in the back line now has like little to no health, and then you use like an AoE spell that would just finish them off afterwards. This is kind of like in my opinion, it's easy to use, but it's hard to master, if that makes sense, because the timing that you may want to use this puppy may get more difficult depending on, you kind of have to watch who you're going to be swapping target or health with to maximize the amount of efficiency that this card will have. But I do think it's extremely strong, and I would definitely recommend running this if you have it. So real quick before we end today's video, I just wanted to thank everyone for the support on the the series here for Summoners War Lost Centuria. I'll continue cranking out the videos, so continue if you would consider, please like, subscribe, and comment what is your favorite spell below. But without further ado, I'm Gaijin Gamer, signing out.